1, 2, 3. Many. That is a real counting system, not a joke about cavemen, not a cartoon. There are languages recorded in the last 100 years whose number words genuinely stop at around 3, and after that, everything is just a word meaning a lot. Which raises an uncomfortable question about the people who came before all of us. If you have no word for 7, can you think about 7 at all? And if you cannot, how did anybody ever build anything? Let me start with what actually happens in a brain that has no number words because we have measured it. In the Amazon, there is a group called the Piraha, and their language has essentially no exact number words. In 2004, a psychologist named Peter Gordon published experiments with them. He would lay out a line of objects and ask people to lay out the same amount alongside it, up to 2 or 3, perfect. Beyond that, performance fell apart, and the errors got steadily worse the larger the quantity got. Now that result got reported everywhere as proof that without words for numbers, you simply cannot handle numbers. But a later study by Michael Frank, Ted Gibson, and colleagues working with the same group showed something more precise and much more interesting. When the objects stayed visible, Pirahan participants could match them exactly at any size. Line up 10 things, they line up 10 things, no problem. The failures appeared when the original was hidden and they had to hold the amount in their head, or when the objects were arranged differently. So the ability to perceive an exact quantity is there. What is missing is the tool that lets you carry that quantity around in your memory and hand it to someone else. Their conclusion is the important sentence in all of this. Number words are not thought. They are a technology for thought, a portable, reusable label that pins an amount down so it survives being carried across a day, a valley, or a conversation. And you can see the seam that technology is covering because your own brain has 2 completely separate systems for quantity, and neither of them is counting. The first is called subitizing. Look at 3 dots and you do not count them. You just see 3 instantly, with no effort and no sense of having worked anything out. That works up to about 4 items and then it stops dead. 5 dots and you either count or you guess. Babies have this before language, so do birds and fish. The second is the approximate number system. It handles any size at all, but it is fuzzy, and its accuracy depends on ratios rather than amounts. 16 dots against 8 dots. Easy. 16 against 15, and you are guessing. This is also ancient, also shared with other animals, and it is what you are using when you glance at a crowd and think, that is about 200 people. Look at where those 2 systems meet and you will see something. 1, 2, 3, and then it goes soft. That is not a coincidence about primitive languages. That is the actual shape of the hardware, showing through in any human who has not been handed the technology. So the honest answer to whether an ancient human could count past 3 is that their brain was identical to yours. The question is only ever whether they had been given the tools. And here is where it gets good, because we can find the tools. Go to Border Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists there recovered a piece of baboon leg bone with 29 notches cut into it, deliberately, in a row. It is around 43,000 years old. 29 notches. Somebody sat down and made a mark, then another, 29 separate times, and kept them in order. You do not need a word for 29 to do that. Each notch stands for one thing. The bone remembers for you. That is arguably the oldest data storage device we have ever found. Then there is the Ishango bone from the Congo, roughly 20,000 years old, with notches arranged in 3 organized columns rather than one long row. People have argued for decades about what the groupings mean, and the honest position is that nobody knows. But grouping is not nothing. Grouping is the beginning of structure. There is a more recent and more contested case worth mentioning. In 2023, a team including an independent researcher named Bennett Bacon published an analysis of the dots and lines that appear next to painted animals in Ice Age cave art. Their argument is that the marks track months, and that the number of marks beside an animal relates to its breeding season. Plenty of specialists are unconvinced, but it is a serious attempt at a real question, which is what all those marks were for. Now for the part that changed how I think about this entirely, because it is not about bones. It is about bodies. In parts of Papua New Guinea, communities count on their body. You start at the little finger of one hand, go up the fingers, then the wrist, forearm, elbow, upper arm, shoulder, then the neck, the ear, the eye, across to the nose, and back down the other side. Each landmark is a number. Depending on the system, that gives you a reliable sequence running to 27, 33, or more. Think about what that is. It is a counting system that requires no words, no writing, no objects, and no equipment, and everybody carries it with them permanently. You can hold up an amount by touching your own elbow, and the person watching knows exactly which number you mean. That is not a poor substitute for real counting. That is real counting running on hardware that was already there. And once you see counting as a technology rather than an ability, everything about the ancient evidence lines up. Tally sticks, knotted cords, notched bones, marked stones. Every single one of these is doing the same job. Taking an amount out of a head, where it decays, and putting it into an object, where it does not. There is one more piece of evidence that cuts against the whole romantic story, and it deserves saying. In Australia, researchers including Brian Butterworth worked with children who speak Warlpiri and Anindilyakwa, languages with very limited number vocabulary. On tasks involving exact amounts, those children performed just as well as English-speaking children. So having few number words does not make you bad with quantities. It makes it harder to store and transmit them, which is exactly the distinction we started with. Put all of this together and the picture is clear. An ancient human 40,000 years ago had your brain, subitizing up to 4, a good approximate sense of larger amounts, and when they needed exactness, they built it, out of notches and knots and their own knuckles. They could count as far as they had a reason to count. The limit was never their mind. It was whether anyone had invented the words yet.